In the last video, we talked about how ADHD is super common in kids and causes a variety of symptoms. We also talked about how we can study ADHD by looking at brain size because it helps us know where the symptoms come from so we can target them in treatment, and how we can look at the thickness of the cortex or the volume of the subcortex to do that. In this video, we'll focus on how cortical thickness changes in ADHD. The cortex of the brain, or outside, is divided into many sections just like a map. Each one of these regions has a different distribution of neurons or brain cells, so each section can be singled out when we're taking pictures of the brain. The functions of these sections are slightly more advanced than those in the subcortex, like decision-making, imagination, critical thinking, response inhibition, and attention. The thickness of each of these parts will determine how well the brain can carry out that function. All parts of the cortex are also divided into gyri, or the wrinkly bumps of the brain, and sulci, which are the ridges between these bumps. And that's another thing we can measure: the surface area of the gyri and the depth of the sulci. The tricky thing about cortical thickness is that not all parts are equally thick, and not all parts will stay the same as you get older. These different parts of the cortex, well, they can be thicker, which usually means they're more active. They can also be thinner, which usually means they're less active. And in a brain with ADHD, the parts of the cortex that thin out the most are at the front, where judgment, movement, future planning, and inhibition happen. Again, this doesn't make anyone less smart, it just means that this is where we could aim meds or brain stimulation. As to why they're like this, well, it's just like with subcortical volume, cortical thickness depends on a mix of genetics, or what you inherit from your parents, and the environment you grow up in. So if someone grew up in an environment with lots of learning and thinking, they'd likely have a slightly thicker cortex than someone who didn't. And it's these changes to cortical thickness that contribute to the symptoms and their severity in brains with ADHD. There's still so much we don't know, but with more research, we can figure out the exact causes of ADHD symptoms.